Muchísimas gracias, doctora Jenny. Buenos días a todos. Yo soy la doctora Elia Enriques Viveros y la doctora Jenny nos ha hecho favor de invitar a través de la FeNasTAC y muy contentos de participar. Muchas gracias. Como seguramente ya se planteó, nuestra sección va a consistir en, hemos hecho una invitación a la señora Soriana Jaurun, que ella es CEO de una empresa canadiense llamada Infotech y que maneja una herramienta muy poderosa relacionada con la evaluación de factores de riesgo, y precisamente ella ha desarrollado un producto de evaluación de la norma 035. Gracias, estoy recibiendo saludos de muchas personas. Me da muchísimo gusto conectarnos ante esta nueva realidad que estamos viviendo en muchos de los países, en todos los países del mundo. Y solamente vamos a esperar que la señora Soriana, Jenny, tú me vas a decir si se conecta, pero antes de que se conecte o que ella comience, me gustaría solamente hacer un recordatorio de lo que significa la norma 035. Entonces, si me permiten, voy a conectar.
Adelante, doctora, el auditorio es suyo, puede compartir pantalla y la doctora también ya está conectada.
Ok, muchas gracias. Solamente recordar, vamos a hacer un pequeño, así. Digo, solamente un recordatorio que la norma 35, como ustedes saben, es un instrumento que ha desarrollado la Secretaría del Trabajo para la identificación y análisis de factores de riesgo psicosocial. Entonces, este instrumento muy valioso permite a los centros de los factores de riesgo psicosocial en los centros de trabajo, así como evaluar el entorno organizacional en que los trabajadores desarrollan sus actividades. El campo de aplicación, por supuesto, es en todo el país, en todo el territorio nacional, y aplica en todos los centros de trabajo. Y entonces la norma entró en vigor el 23 de octubre del 19, ¿sí? Y para la identificación de estos, los sujetos a evaluar son sujetos a acontecimientos traumáticos severos durante el trabajo y canalizarlos para su atención clínica a través de la guía de referencia 1. Además de ello, de manera muy importante, todas las empresas debieron haber ya desarrollado su política.
Esto ya lo tengo, lo tengo.
Si son tan amables, silenciar sus micrófonos. Mónica.
Ay, disculpen.
No te preocupes, Mónica. También debe haber desarrollado durante este tiempo las medidas y acción de prevención o control. También disponer de mecanismos seguros y confidenciales para recepción de quejas, documentar los registros y evidencias de lo que ustedes están desarrollando y las acciones. Entonces, estas guías de referencia es la guía 1, todos los trabajadores de la empresa se debieron haber llenado antes del 23 de octubre del 2019. Y para el cumplimiento de este año 2020, pues está la guía 2, que son para empresas entre 16 o centros de trabajo, por decirlo con un poquito más de claridad, empresas entre 16 a 50 trabajadores, y la guía 3, empresas de más de 51 trabajadores. En todo momento, la empresa pues debe realizar esta evaluación de cuestionarios y recomendamos, por supuesto, los que no lo habían hecho, pues completar a la brevedad la guía 1 y la guía 2 en todo momento para cumplir con la norma 035 este año 2020. Claro que la responsabilidad de los trabajadores es participar activamente a través de llenar todos estos cuestionarios y observar las medidas de prevención. Lo que a ustedes vamos a presentarles en un momento dado a través de la señora Serena Hagrun, quien decíamos es CEO de la empresa Infotech, es una herramienta muy poderosa de identificación de riesgos a la salud y particularmente ella creó la plataforma, el servicio de la norma 035 para sus clientes en México. Entonces, es una serie de... Esta plataforma genera reportes acerca del estatus de los trabajadores que requieren valoración clínica por niveles de riesgo y muy interesante, de manera muy interesante, permite hacer un seguimiento para que se revise esta población sujeta a la aplicación de esta norma. Claro que evidentemente son plataformas amigables, de fácil lectura, ambiente muy gráfico, muy visual y por supuesto en nuestro idioma. Algún aspecto extremadamente importante es el manejo confidencial de la información que se procesa y se hace evaluación y análisis de todos los cuestionarios. Claro, también los reportes por dimensión, dominio y categoría. Entonces, la presentación de la señora Soriana Hagrun va a ser muy visual. Ella va a platicarles en inglés, sin embargo, ha hecho un esfuerzo muy grande por tener las gráficas todas en español, por supuesto, y la traducción de la presentación. A continuación, me gustaría dejar de compartir. Aquí tienen mis datos, mi teléfono, y quien quiera consultar el sitio web donde encuentra más información sobre esta plataforma. Y voy a dejar de compartir y preguntarle a la señora Hagrun si ella puede comenzar con su disertación. Por supuesto, en todo momento, ustedes pueden hacer preguntas, yo diría que por el chat, y nosotros vamos a estar procurando al final de la presentación leer sus preguntas para la audiencia y tratar de contestarlas.
Doctora Hirons, ¿nos escucha? Hola, doctora. Está
Hello, Soriana. We know that you are connected. Just, I think she's trying to share.
It says that my video the host has stopped it, so someone needs to allow me to show my video.
Déjale compartir a la doctora Hiron. Ok.
Gracias, Jenny, muy amable.
Okay.
Por favor, siéntanse con la confianza los demás de hacer sus preguntas por el chat y trataremos de contestarlas. Go ahead, Soriana, please.
Okay, it still says I can't share my video.
Okay. Jenny will help us
to share screen.
Yes,
no,
please.
it's not allowing me to show my video. Start the video.
Can you
no, okay.
share screen?
I can share screen, but you can't see me though. Is that okay? It's fine with me if you don't see me?
Yeah, start my video.
I can share. Can you see my screen?
A ver, ya, porque va retrasada. Perfecto. Ready, Dr. Soriana?
Yes. Are you going to let me through the video or not? Allow me.
Jenny, no sé si ustedes tengan que permitirle que abra su video.
Sí, ya apareció la autorización y ya se aceptó.
Okay, Soriana, they have already made
They've made, okay, so you can see me as well as my screen.
We are seeing your screen, Soriana.
Very good. First of all, good morning. Buenos dias. And I first I want to thank you for inviting me to speak to you this morning. And secondly, I do need to apologize and explain that I do not speak Spanish very well. I understand it, not too badly, but I do not speak it. So unfortunately, I will be speaking in English, and I presume someone will be translating for me. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right. So I will, if I start speaking too quickly, please let me know so I can slow down for the translation. So just a few words about our company and the background and what brought us to the point of creating the NOM service for our clients in Mexico. A little bit about our company. We have a global service called Wellness Checkpoint, health risk assessment, and it first was released 30 years ago now, a long time. And we have been working globally. And in Mexico, we have been working since 1995 with companies like Procter & Gamble, DuPont, GSK, BP, AkzoNobel, Intel, American Express, many companies over the years. Now, what is our experience in evaluating psychosocial risks? So our first collaboration with the UK was in a product called Organizational Stress Audit. That was in 1998. Since 2000, we have also did the work experience scan together with our client DuPont on their request. Then we integrated into our standard health risk assessment a measure of organizational stress. It was first used as a stress satisfaction offset score, and now it measures not only control, reward, effort, and demand, but it also measures respect and fairness in the workplace and supervisory support. It has been used internationally since 2002. Then we have been presenting the results of our data that we have been collecting on psychosocial factors as well as on mental health issues like depression. Again, depression has been part of our product since approximately 1998. I've presented on this together with Elia and Dr. Morales in the International Congress of ICOA in Ireland, as well as last year in Brasilia. We have a number of different evaluations that governments have mandated for our clients. The first was the Taiwan Burnout Survey. The second in 2017 was the Japan Stress Check. And in 1990, the Mexico Psychosocial Risk Identification and Severe Traumatic Event Survey to comply with the NOM 035 legislation. I've put in here just a summary of what the objectives of the 3 surveys, and it's 3 surveys we offer. The first is the severe traumatic, and that focuses on the experience of the individual employee. So the purpose of that is primarily to identify employees who have encountered and experienced post-traumatic stress, and they are, and this is the important part, and they are still experiencing the effects of that stress. So if, as you'll see from the data, those who have had experienced severe traumatic stress and no longer have those symptoms, they're past that, they are not required, they do not require further medical evaluation. However, those that do, in fact, need to be provided the opportunity and, in fact, if I can say gently coaxed or encouraged to get the assistance and the evaluation they need. on the part of the employer, there is a legal obligation that all employees at workplaces of more than 16 employees must complete this. And so part of what we need to provide to have the employer meet their obligations is a measure of being able to track and report who has done, who has completed, who has been recommended for, identified for evaluation, but in fact still doing that in a way that secures the employee's privacy and confidentiality. And I want to emphasize that. So the legal obligations for the employer is also that they need to document their compliance for inspection. And that requirement was last year. That was the first requirement to have that part of the survey completed last year. The next part, the next survey, which is a much longer survey and has a different purpose, and it's to identify risks and its purpose is to look at the work site. To look at the work site, and the employee's role in completing the survey is to provide the data to the company so that the company can be able to identify what gaps they have and where they need to take action. And the regulations are very clear that that action has to be specific to each work site. So there are actions that need to be overall for the company. However, the management at the work site needs to understand the special factors related to that group of employees. And they need to be able to not only develop a plan, but they also need to be able to communicate what action they need to take to that employee. And I'm just thinking whether I have the correct slide, because my slide deck appears to be not in Spanish. Let me just take 1 minute, please. I'm going to just pause and just check this, please. I apologize for that.
Meanwhile, Soriana, I will comment something with them. Yo quería enfatizar algo de lo que está mencionando la señora Soriana. Es que las empresas tienen que hacer la evaluación, aplicar las evaluaciones a cada centro de trabajo que tengan a partir de 16 empleados. Quiere decir que las empresas tendrán varias identificaciones en sus diferentes centros de trabajo.
All right, I'm fine. I apologize, in the time available, we not able to get all the slides into Spanish completely. So I will share again. Can you see my slide, the PowerPoint?
Yes, we can see it.
The PowerPoint is the one that you...
We're seeing your screen.
You're seeing my desktop or the PowerPoint?
Yes, your desktop.
Okay, sorry. Let me just stop that and share the correct one. Is that better?
Yes, better.
Good. So the focus on the psychosocial risk identification is that the employer needs to understand and gain insight from the data. And it's very focused on the data telling the story on which you need to be able then to develop your plans. And the documentation compliance is that it needs to be available for inspection by the ministry to make sure that in fact that is done. The obligation is every 2 years, and the deadline for the first year for having the plans complete, not just the survey, is this month on the 23rd of October. There's a third survey, which is often not talked about, but very important, and it's optional. And it's not really a questionnaire in terms of psychosocial risk. It's more to understand the kind of demographic profile of the workers. So again, the intention that the ministry had in issuing this is that you need to not all employees are the same. You need to be able to take a look at this, not only by gender, by age, but also by the kind of work they do, the kind of work schedule they have, and various other factors that may in fact impact and make different situations, different conditions. So it's important to understand more. One thing I have learned in 30 years of working with employers globally is there is very, when you go for averages, and if you look at everybody, if you look at todos, everybody, you will not see the actions that you need to address at an individual group level. Every group is different. Rolling them up is important because it gives you an overview, but in fact, you need to consider the unique and special characteristics of each because they are different. The other thing, and so this helps us, in fact, in looking into us, this is a very important part. So it is a mandatory part of how we deliver the NOM surveys and how we report the data. And you'll see the benefit of that as I show some of that data. You access for, clients can access the service either directly. In other words, that's all that they only have access to the service, the psychosocial NOM service, or for those companies that already have Wellness Checkpoint, which is our comprehensive health risk solution, the employee can do one or the other, but the data collected is all connected. And so you'll also see, as I talk about the data, the fact that we're able to look at the employee's profile and draw on other information we know about them. And I will be highlighting, for example, depression status. Very important to be able to connect those two. But if that's, if all you're interested in is the NOM, that it can work that way as well. So there are two kinds of reports, and I think illustrating how it works is probably easiest by focusing on what information do we provide to the employee, and what do we provide to the employer. So to the employee, the first thing we need to do is give them and explain the results of what they've just answered 2 questionnaires, and this is the other aspect. We recommend answering them together because when you did the companies that did that last year, they have had a whole year or at least half a year of which to consider the data, because the deadline or the milestone as of this month is not simply to have done the surveys, but to have the data available. Now, one of the ways that we can help address those requirements, even at this late date, is that immediately on the individual, the employee completing the assessment, by the next day, by midnight, you have access to all the data and all the reports up until as of midnight the prior day. So you don't need to wait for a long time to process the reports. You have direct access to that. For the employee, immediately on completing the first survey, the severe traumatic event survey, they immediately are notified if in fact they need the clinical evaluation. There is nothing waiting for them. The screen comes up and it tells them where and what they need to do. Then they also, they can generate a listing because, again, I said privacy is important. No one else has access to the content of their data. The company has access that they've completed it, but not access to the data. And so the important thing is this listing of data, which if in fact they are to be reporting or to be able to have the clinical evaluation, they can take that listing, they can print it, they can take it to their clinical appointment. And the clinician, the physician or the psychologist can have access to that data, but the employee controls who they give access to the data to. This is a very important part of our commitment to privacy. Also, when the employee is entering the system, that is all disclosed to them. And if they feel uncomfortable about that, they are always told what data is being collected and what will be done with that data and who has access to that data. We have a participation report, and this is for the employer, and actually it's the control report to show you who has completed it and who requires clinical, and it would just be clinical evaluation C, just a yes next to that, no more. And so that you can then follow up to make sure that they have presented themselves and taken advantage of the clinical evaluation. It's not clear what one needs to do if employee says, I do not wish to do that. I think you'd need to address those questions to the ministry, but at least we provide you all the information you need to fulfill your obligation. Then we provide a series of reports to the employer. And these are looking not only at an overall look, as well as comparing to the groups. To each group, each work site would have its own data available, as well as the comparison to some benchmark norms. So you want to know always comparison. How are we doing compared to what we are, compared to what others are, compared to different parts of our organization, compared to different groups within our organization. And for some of the clients that have already done this last October, when they do this again, how are we doing compared to last year? And this is a really important comparison, particularly with COVID. So we have a client that completed, some of our clients, most of them completed it last year, but some clients have completed it this year during COVID. And everybody's anxious to see how are we doing compared to that, because the work environment has changed fundamentally. I don't need to tell you more about that to be able to say that. So looking over time is an important part of what we do. Sorry. And then we also have very detailed reports based on the NOM, the categoria, the dominio, and the dimension. So not only, because if all you look is at the overall numbers, the overall rating, you do not know what's driving it. And what drives it is different in every group of employees. So you need to, at a worksite level, go back and understand that, and also at a company level. So this is a very important part of the information we provide to the employer, so that they can understand where the issues are, and they can use it as a blueprint, as a guide to develop their action plan. So I'm going to be showing you in a minute, sharing some of the data that we have from year one. The data is data collected from it's a representative sample of the data. It does not include all of our client data or all of the locations. It does look at 7 work sites that are represented, that are typical, to give an example. And it also covers just under 4,500 employees. Some of those work in headquarters. Some of those work in regional offices. Some of those are at manufacturing plants. Some of those work out in the field or are home-based. And some of those are in technical centers. So different employee population, different kinds of environment, different kinds of issues. And some of them will be quite surprising for you. Now, and some of those sites will range from 200 to 1,200. So from small to large in different populations. We have the data from all three surveys, the severe traumatic, the psychosocial, and the profile of the worker profile so that we can analyze the subgroups. We also have additional data. As I mentioned before, some of the employees have already completed or have since they did the NOM completed the full or updated their full health risk assessment. So for 63% of the employees, we also have data on their depression rating and depression history. That'll be a very, very important part of getting insight. So of the 4 centers, in general, 33% of the employees have reported that they have experienced one or more severe traumatic event. I don't know if that's surprising to you. It certainly is surprising to us. We haven't seen anything like that in any of the other psychosocial or reports and surveys we've done elsewhere in any of the other countries, or similar data for our client employers. Now, again, as I said, if you go by average, you don't see what's underneath. And if you look at the 7 sites, you can see a big range of that. That's not the minimum of 24% and a maximum of 50%. That's a huge difference. And if all you looked at was the 33%, you would not be able to recognize the difference in that. And that is part of what I believe was the intention, to make it focused on the workplace site. So we're going to, when I want to compare work sites, I'm going to focus on 2, the one with the 50% and the one with 24%. Going to use it. And today I'm only sharing with you the data from the severe traumatic events. I am not going to go into the data from the psychosocial risk identification. That's a separate subject, and not be able to cover that today and do that properly in both cases. So here is also, not only are these populations different ages, but different mix of female, predominantly male, predominantly female. So quite a different workplace setting for each of these. And you can see the sizes of that. So let's take a look at these 2 work sites just very quickly, MX1 and MX6. You'll see quite a difference in the age, even though the average age doesn't seem to be that big difference, but it quite is. This is a younger, absolutely a younger workforce, and predominantly male. This is a middle-aged workforce primarily, and predominantly female. They're different. Now, this is also in levels of education and in the kind of work that they do. So you can see that where we're starting off with a completely different kind of employee population, working under different circumstances, with different age. And one of the things we know is, as people as we look at older populations, they tend to have less depression generally. People who are younger tend to have more depression. Where there is a more female population, we tend to see more depression. That's without taking into consideration anything to do with traumatic events. So now let's look. There's a significant difference between those of the population, that 33, who in fact had an event, and those who require clinical evaluation. So what I'm showing you here is from the NOM guidelines. These are the criteria. That person is sent for evaluation if they have responded yes to any of the 2 factors in terms of persistent memories or persistent dreams. If they have responded yes to any 3 of the section where they're taking action to avoid situations that remind them of their trauma, and if they've answered yes to any 2 or more of after effects. So we're going to just delve in this. So here what we see is 33% on average said that they encountered 1 or more traumatic events. Of those, 23% said they had 2 or more. And 21% meet these criteria and require medical attention. At MEX 1 site, 50% had 1 or more traumatic event, 39% had 2 or more, and 32% require medical evaluation. We see a slightly different pattern in this other group, 24, multiple, but in fact less. So we have a different view to begin with. I'm going to concentrate a lot of my analysis on this group, the group in the red, the people who have been identified for clinical evaluation. Found a very interesting factor. For those who had an event, but are not in the clinical group, I would have expected that they still had some symptoms. They may not have had as many as this, but I expected them to have some symptoms. Not. In other words, if they've had the event, they either have no symptoms and they're past it, or they have a lot of symptoms. There isn't that gray zone where you're kind of remembering, but not really. And it's not that important. You're either past it and you've dealt with it, or it's still bothering you and it's still affecting what you do every day. Because when we ask them about effects and memories, we ask about the last 30 days. So let's look at the type of events, assault. And we see assault sticking out. Now this is looking 27% of all employees, all, regardless of whether they had reported that they've experienced an assault at work. I don't know how that sounds to you, but that sounds pretty high to me. Now, if you look at those who said that they have experienced, in other words, if they say that I have had, 80% of them say they've had experienced an assault at work. And these others pale in comparison. So I could talk for hours on the data, but I'm going to focus on the assault, the big one. And if we look at those who need clinical evaluation, assault is still the big item. It's a little less than, in fact, because some of them, as I said, are past it, they've dealt with it. But assault is a big item. Now let's look. I tried to say, is there a difference between groups? Is there a difference based on age? Is there a difference based on gender? Is there a difference based on the kind of work they do, whether they do shift work or they work in a day? Is there a difference based on the kind of work that they do, whether they're operators, professionals, or technical supervisors or managers? So this blue line is the percentage of all employees. if we focus our attention on those who've reported one or more events, that changes significantly. And if we look at those who need clinical evaluation, now you'll see there's a little difference. There is a difference on shift work. There's very little difference on male and female. There's a little difference, but not based on age. But there is a significant difference, slipping down, in terms of the kind of work that they do. So again, if all the information you had stopped at looking at all, you would not see this. And this is where I say that profile of, they call it datos de of workers. I've got that wrong. I'm sorry, my Spanish is dreadful. I can read it, I can understand it, I can hear it, but I have a bit of a problem in speaking it. But, you know, we learned French in Canada, not Spanish as our second language. But I have been trying. All right, so we see alts very, very for all the groups, So the people that are being sent to recommended to be going for medical evaluation are dealing with some pretty heavy stuff, and they're still remembering. So let's take a look at those remembering. So the first was that they have to say yes, they either have consistent dreams or memories, persistent dreams or memories. And so we see only a quarter have that. So that did not tip them over to say you need a clinical evaluation. Then when we look at the circumstances, and can you read that? That's basically they're avoiding anything that reminds them of the trauma. And you can read this better than I can, but it's the avoidance. I was robbed once at an airport when I was on a business trip. And for the longest time, and I was robbed, there were many people and they chose me to rob. And the fact that they chose me made me extremely wary and nervous. Anytime I would be driving a rental car, anytime I was alone, if a car stopped next to me, it took me 4 or 5 years to let that go. So I have had, fortunately, in all the years of business and travel I've had, that was my only business-related traumatic event. So I'm very fortunate, and it's past. I'd almost forgotten about it. It happened about 20 years ago. Now, here's the kicker. Because this is saying, what's the effect on them? And 44% of the people that you need to have that medical evaluation are having trouble sleeping. 38% are having trouble concentrating. You know, the fact that they're miserable or irritable, you know, one can pass through. But if they're jittery and alert, that is a safety issue. That is a business risk. So it's not just about the individual. This is where the expression goes, the rubber hits the runway. This is where these people are suffering impacts ongoing in the past month that can impact their ability and their safety at work and the safety of others on their team. So I think it's a wake-up call when you see this, and you have to look beyond simply, do they need an evaluation or not? And this is why I'm going into some detail to share with you what I see in the data. And as I mentioned, 63% of the people in the sample database that we have, benchmark database, we also have depression data for. And that puts a different spin. Now we see something different. So the average benchmark, and we see this globally, It might vary up and down a bit in some countries, but 7% of people would be reporting symptoms that correspond to moderate or severe depression. The significance of the moderate to severe depression means at that level, there is treatment indicated, requirement for treatment, appropriate treatment. Some of that might be counseling and talk therapy. Some of that may be medical interventions and pharmaceutical interventions. So again, the 7% is not reflective. If you just look, here's the rest of the people. So in fact, a young population, as I mentioned, a young population will have a higher rate of depression. We expect that. We see that all the time. But interestingly enough, this female population, remember we saw, is pretty low. That's because they're a little older. And that helps as well. So there's a few things that come good with age. We're able to handle these kinds of issues like depression and anxiety a little better. And that comes with just probably resilience. Now, let's look at those employees who report one or more severe traumatic. Now, you see the colors. Why are these colors? The colors here reflect how different they are from the benchmark. They're green if that group has rate prevalence that is better or as good as the benchmark. So if they meet the benchmark norm or are better than, they'll be green. If they're just a little higher, up to 20% higher than the benchmark, they'll be yellow. If they're 10%, if they're 21 to 30, actually this is to 30 to 39, 40% greater, it will be red. If it's black, it's more than 40% off. And if we look at this, you see that we're starting to look here, 8, this is more than 40% off. This is more than 50% off. Now, when we look at those who need clinical evaluation only, whoa. So if you're looking just at the population, but these have those who require the medical intervention, have 2 times the prevalence of moderate to severe depression. 2 times. That is huge. And so this is a good time to be able to look at that. But the other factor, in addition to the depression screening, and we use PHQ-9, there's one question at the end of it, the 10th question of a 9-question survey. I jokingly laugh. And that question asks them, have your depression symptoms, your symptoms of depression, made it difficult for you to fulfill your obligations? And then it goes further, at work, at home, and in your personal life. That's a pretty encompassing. And so the next slide will show you those responses. Again, so here is for the people who have severe, this is the people we've been focusing on. They have 14% answered. However, 19% said that they, on average, had difficulty. That's because those who reported symptoms in the mild depression range are also having difficulty. They're also struggling, even though they're not at the level that is technically the cutoff for medical evaluation and treatment. But these people would benefit from EAP support that is most companies already have in place. So that's why I wanted to show you this. If you look at this group, so this is our MX1, 2. So we have this kind of being higher than, so in this particular MX3, a good portion of those who have mild depression still are bothered. whereas in MX2, very few. So you basically have these people here. Again, if you made your decisions exclusively on this average, you would miss the differences. And so this is a very important part of what all of our reporting is. We believe, my philosophy in terms of metrics is you need to show a high-level metric, but then you need to see what's driving it. And you need to be able to go down to look at each group so you understand how that differs from group to group. That's and you need to be able to have direct access to the data, and so that you can access it any time, and it will be current as of the night before. That is our commitment to our clients. So, what are the lessons we've learned? And the prevalence of traumatic events is higher than most of us would have expected. I don't know if it's the same to you, but certainly to me, that is the case. Surprisingly higher. And if you look at the subgroups, whether it's by age, by gender, by the kind of work they do, or by the hours or when they work, you have a similar pattern. There is a difference, as we pointed out, in terms of some difference in terms of the shift work, and some difference in terms of kind of the level or the hierarchy that they are in the organization. And many of the people continue to have the effects of the trauma. They're still reliving it. And so, Elia, help me if I'm reading off this and I'm seeing only the Spanish. So this is testing my Spanish knowledge.
It says that many of the employees will continue to have trauma memories, and problems with sleep, having depression in different levels,
And it does affect their work. So this is not just about fulfilling the legal obligations you have. This is about protecting your employees, protecting not only those who, helping the employees who are experiencing this, protecting the other employees that they're working with, because as I say, there is a safety exposure here. And also being responsible employers who are concerned about maintaining the psychological safety, not only the physical safety, but the psychological safety of their employee population. But what we found is, in lesson learned, is that we need a little bit more information, because the way the questions are set up, we don't really know if that event occurred at your workplace, at the same workplace, or maybe it occurred, like my accident, my robbery was 5 years or 25 years ago, so I would answer yes. And so you need to know a little bit more if in fact you want to say, I better understand about this assault. What does this mean? And so you're not, you can take the appropriate action, and the actions you control are the actions within your workplace, work site. You have less control of the actions that happen when the employee is on their way, traveling to work, traveling from work home, or traveling in the course of doing their work. And that has, so if I were the manager I would want to know that, because it does make a difference. And so we're going to be adding some questions fairly shortly to have that in place so that we can focus on that. Also, our clients are also saying to us, you know, the COVID is an interesting variable to this. How has this changed with COVID? And we're expecting to get some suggestions from some of our clients, which we will then review with all of our clients and jointly decide what we want to add so that we can better understand if there are some particular questions or particular considerations we need to identify with respect to COVID and the experience since then. And so that's kind of the lessons learned. And I'm going to finish off with two, what I call bottom line conclusions. Or, excuse me, three. So from my way of looking at this data, it's probably one of the most interesting data sets that I have seen in my 30 years of working with health risk data and psychosocial factors. And it is more than, much more value than simply compliance with NOM. So you have an opportunity to look under the, as we say, under the covers and better understand what's going on. And to do so while still respecting the privacy of the employee. That is really great. And the capacity when you can correlate this data with other data you have, because in NOM, under the psychosocial factors, it does have as part of the regulations that when employees have their regular medical checkup, these factors should be taken into consideration. It doesn't say how to do that and still maintain confidentiality, but in fact, it's what I've said, we've provided the employee access at any time to their own data. They can update it, they can view it, they can print it, and they can take it to whoever is they want to consult with. And the last one, I think, is that the data is extremely valuable, not just for looking at at traumatic stress, but actually in managing the business risk at the work site. And that is really important, because when you can provide data to the site management and to the higher leadership in your company, data that in fact speaks their language of risk and risk mitigation, then you catch their attention and you have an opportunity, a good opportunity to start that dialogue. And remember, also it gives you a good opportunity to play back and communicate back to the employees what you've learned and what you're going to do about that. So I leave that with a positive note and an exciting note. I'm open for any questions you may have.
Bueno, mientras ustedes escriben o piensan su pregunta, me gustaría agregar un par de lecciones aprendidas. Hemos observado a lo largo de este tiempo sobre la aplicación de la norma que algunas empresas se abocan a hacer cuestionarios y desafortunadamente no los procesan, no los analizan y los dejan ahí, ¿no? Debe quedar bien claro que aquí lo importante es darle toda esta valor a los datos que están obteniendo y procesarlos, analizarlos e identificar para tomar acciones, ¿no? Pero también una lección muy importante es que muchas veces hacen las cosas de manera tan rústica que les toma demasiado tiempo hacer sus análisis, y estas son tecnologías que ya existen al servicio de las empresas para que ustedes puedan hacer la labor de contar con la información y los reportes de manera inmediata, como decía Soriana. Se terminó ayer de llenar y ustedes inmediatamente Al día siguiente tienen toda la información de cómo va el proceso de análisis de sus datos estadísticos. Esa es otra lección aprendida, o sea, usar las tecnologías al servicio pues de la salud de los trabajadores y tener prontamente estos diagnósticos para que puedan hacer las intervenciones o las recomendaciones a la gerencia y tomar acciones, ¿sí? Entonces, todo esto que acaba de mencionar Soriana está causando una presentismo en los trabajadores, ¿no? El que tiene problemas de depresión, el que tiene problemas del sueño, el que no se concentra. Definitivamente esos son aspectos de causa de presentismo y, por supuesto, por ende, pérdida en la productividad empresarial. Entonces, Jenny, si tú quieres coordinar la sección de preguntas.
Sí, doctora, gracias. Muy interesante lo que nos muestra la doctora y definitivamente el mantener la salud mental de nuestros trabajadores, como dice, ofrecen herramientas y ahora considerar que algunos de los clientes y muchos de las empresas que aquí nosotros hemos tenido en Querétaro de experiencia, después de que tienen un familiar o padecieron COVID, son situaciones a las que nos vamos a enfrentar en un futuro muy, muy próximo, y que tenemos que estar preparados para saber de qué manera, así como nos llegó la pandemia que no sabíamos ni para dónde hacernos, todo fue tan rápido, desde equipo de protección, protegernos, qué medidas tomar, todo esto que salió en un principio, ahora vienen los efectos a nivel mental y pues esto representa una herramienta en el chat. Si alguien quiere hacer una pregunta, ahorita no han escrito nada, doctora. Creo que fue muy gráfica la información que nos dio la doctora Soriana, como bien lo habíamos comentado.
¿Puedo comentar
Y
algo?
aquí hay una pregunta. Dice...
Sí,
uh-huh.
claro
Sí,
que sí. Go ahead, Soriana. Someone is writing a question about if Infotech adapt to the necessities of the company, or there is an established questionnaires.
Sorry, can we adapt to a different NOM? We're talking about specifically about NOM questionnaires?
No, I have to answer in Spanish, but Liliana, o sea, la herramienta que se aplica es exactamente como lo pide la norma 035. ¿Sí? Sin embargo, lo que en una de las diapositivas les presentó la señora Soriana es varios de estos clientes que tiene Infotech, aparte tienen una plataforma llamada Wellness Checkpoint, que es una evaluación, una herramienta, una plataforma para evaluar factores de riesgo a la salud, en donde en esa plataforma tienen, por ejemplo, el módulo de depresión, como dice aquí, se aplican 9 preguntas y se hace la correlación de lo que presenta los resultados de la norma en relación a eventos traumáticos y hace una correlación con el estatus de depresión en ese centro de trabajo. Pero evidentemente la empresa puede tener solo la aplicación de la norma 035 o además tener el Wellness Checkpoint. I am talking, Sariana, about the mixture to have a NOM 035 alone and
yes, and
yeah,
and I just wanted to add something to that. When we implemented NOM, we were able to draw on all the features that we have in Wellness Checkpoint. We did not develop these reports only for NOM. We were able to use what we already have, and that's why we can deliver a lot more power in the reporting, because anybody can ask questions. It's what you do with the data that comes with the answers, and how you can present it to management is where it has value to the business. So to comply with NOM and comply that everybody's taken the questionnaire, you could do it by paper, you could do it anyhow. but to comply with the essence of what NOM is saying, and that is, how do you change? How do you understand what you need to do and how you need to do for each workplace? You need this. You need more power. And so we're able to benefit from the investment we already have for something that's been proven and we're using globally. So Mexico NOM service benefits from all of that.
Yes, here we have another question. If you have seen simulators, people telling lies with the evaluation, and if you have any instrument to detect if someone is lying.
That's a really interesting question. And we've been asked that question from the very beginning, because don't forget, we do a health risk assessment, and we ask questions on things like sensitive things, like how much alcohol do you drink, and a lot of things. So if people were answering a paper questionnaire, they would probably skip those questions. But we have not, and we've gone back and we've tried to see, do we have people not answering truthfully? Do we have a selection bias? And we have not found that. What we have found sometimes, and the reason for that, my theory would be, is people genuinely want to know how well they're doing. And we've had some situations where there's a mandatory, everybody must complete it, and evaluation. And then when, after the mandatory period, they come back and they update and they tell us they drink much more alcohol than they ever told us before. And they tell us they exercise much less than they said before. Why? Because they want to know what their risks are. So back to the fact is, when in business we talk about return on investment, and return on investment in a questionnaire for the employee is, what do I benefit from answering all of these questions? And so it's really very important to us to be able to give them an instant response, and they don't have to wait, to be able to explain things to them, to do it in such a way that it's of value. And then on the area of the psychosocial risk, and to do so in such a way that management hears what they're saying, and is able to consider that, take action, and communicate back. So the value to the employee is, I have had my opportunity to tell you what is bothering me. And you've listened, and you've taken some steps to address the issue. That is for the employee to see. And if you can communicate this, if you can communicate to them what the value to them is, there is no value for them lying.
Creo que, bueno, parece la explicación fue fácil de comprender, sin embargo, como bien dice Soriana, es la oportunidad del empleo, del trabajador, de decirle a la gerencia o la empresa qué es lo que le está preocupando, ¿no? Entonces, algo muy importante es que ellos tengan la certeza, ¿verdad?, los empleados, que su información es confidencial, ¿no? Es cuidada de manera muy, muy delicada en este sentido. Yes, Ariana, if you want to add something.
Yeah, I wanted to add something. The other way that we check to make sure we don't have screwy data is that we benchmark and we compare, and we see, in every which way, to say, what would we expect to see here, and see if there's, and if there is a large variance, why, to understand the why. So it's not just throwing the data into the air, but really understanding, is this what we would, like I said with depression, is this what we would expect to see? And we base that expect to see on about 15 years of benchmarks every year from globally, and typically we look at over 500,000 people, 500,000 employees in about 60 countries when we're looking at those benchmarks. So we compare, and we're constantly monitoring.
Okay, Soriana, there is a question for another person. Mr. Rubio is asking if through this platform of the NOM 035 it's possible to have information about the mental health of the worker.
Well, NOM does not include that in it. NOM does not include mental health. But where I got the data is because those employees had also completed the wellness checkpoint, where we have several various modules that address psychological and mental health issues. And that is that we have the depression screening, we have anxiety screening, we also have sleep and fatigue. So remember the question on the sleep, to understand not only, you know, what the drivers are, we also look at financial concerns. And we also now have in Spanish, just available now in Spanish, a separate module that looks at resilience. So resilience checkpoint, and one coming soon, within a couple of months, certainly before the end of the year, psychological well-being checkpoint. And that's looking at not only in three phases, three perspectives. One is psychological well-being per se, which, like wellness, means where are all the optimal kinds of things that people who are in a good spot, what are the characteristics that they have? So we're looking at true psychological health. Then we look at psychological disorders. Again, depression and anxiety are the primary ones. And then we have the third perspective. And the third perspective is what is happening in the workplace that in fact can be risk factors to an individual's psychological health. And in all the mental health, the global guidelines, whether it's from WHO or the World Economic Forum or virtually any of them, they say you need to understand the risk factors that in fact the risk to an individual's psychological and mental health that occurs at work. And we use a metric that we have been using for 20 years. I mentioned it before, and certainly can talk about that. And that is called the Stress Satisfaction Offset Score. And what it measures 4 dimensions of what the employees, what comprises job satisfaction. The job satisfiers, control over what they're doing, the ability to control some work decisions, and reward, being recognized and rewarded for their work. And the job stressors are excessive demand and effort required. Those are universal, regardless of whether we're looking at the psychosocial risk factors, it's a category right in the NOM, or whether we're looking at the health and safety, it's there. Control and demand, the control and the demand and the effort are the measures in all of them. But we're asking that in 4 simple questions. Then there are 2 additional questions that form part of that, and that is the level of respect and fairness in the workplace and the support they have from their supervisor and management. And those are at the essence of that. So our psychological well-being includes, as I said, psychological health and optimal well-being, as well as psychological disorders, and then those factors at work that can impact.
Okay, a mí me gustaría aclarar que la norma, recuerden que es para evaluar centros de trabajo a través del trabajador, no para evaluar la salud mental de los trabajadores. Eso ha sido una constante de confusión a raíz de la aplicación de la norma. Ustedes requerirán otros instrumentos para evaluar la salud mental de los trabajadores. Soriana, we have another question from Gerardo of The Economist. When evaluating the organizational environment and psychological risk factors, what are the infallible signs that indicate that there are elements in the workplace that may represent a risk to the emotional health of workers?
Well, we would see that in the data from the psychosocial risk identification. It identifies that. You can see right away where the gaps are, and they'll vary. what we're finding, you know, and some of them, again, it's reflective of the workplace. I don't have that at my fingertips, but that's where you would find the gaps. Are the gaps in terms of communication? Are the gaps in terms of understanding the roles and responsibilities? Is there bullying? Is there harassment? Is there, you know, respect comes through in different ways? There's a very interesting, I found it interesting when I was looking at this data, because in NOM, under the psychosocial risk factors, there's a domain that's called violencia, violence. So I interpreted it saying, well, gee, we can compare the data that we're seeing in terms of the severe traumatic events with the violence that's being reported. And I found, quite to my surprise, when I looked closely, and I'd forgotten about the details of the algorithms, that in fact the violencia, as described in the dominion, dominio, has under it questions that cover. Only one talks about violence in terms of physical violence. So these assaults and all these things that we cover in post-traumatic are not covered in the NOM psychosocial factor in any detail. But what it does cover is bullying. It covers harassment. It covers psychological intimidation. So I would call that not only physical safety, but psychological safety. So you get, there's a wealth of data in that. It's, as I said, I wouldn't have been able to do both topics justice today. So I have focused on the severe traumatic because some of that is pretty astounding.
Oh, thank you, Soriana. I think we don't have any more time because there will be another person talking. But me gustaría agradecer a todos su participación en el caso de nuestra presentación. Muchas gracias por todas sus preguntas. Yo agregué por ahí un correo. Hay algunas otras preguntas que quedan en el tintero, por ejemplo, que si se puede emitir un documento sobre procedimientos en caso de simuladores. Probablemente nosotros no podamos hacerlo o debamos hacerlo, pero todo debe ser en un clima de seguridad, con un ambiente que el trabajador sienta confianza en su empresa y se sienta en engagement con la empresa, ¿no? Así podremos evitar que ellos sepan que realmente la compañía está preocupada por la salud de sus empleados y los trabajadores van a tratar de contestar de manera correcta. Pero algo muy importante y un consejo para todos ustedes, que hagan algo con sus datos, analícenlos con profundidad, vean qué pueden hacer, cómo pueden hacer para ayudarlos. El hecho de identificar a alguien que requiere evaluación médica y solo mandarlo y dejarlo sin darle seguimiento, sin escucharlo o no proveerle las ayudas, entonces hace que ustedes pierdan elementos fundamentales y puede ser un buen empleado, ¿no? Desafortunadamente estamos en una situación del país difícil y como lo ven ustedes hay un gran número de personas que está teniendo asaltos en sus centros de trabajo, digo fuera de sus centros de trabajo probablemente, no lo sabemos, y muchos de ellos, más del 20% están requiriendo evaluación clínica. Doctora Jenny, nosotros hemos concluido, por favor dinos que...
sí, doctora Eli, estoy aquí, estamos aquí escuchando ya las conclusiones del tema. Muchísimas gracias, doctora. Definitivamente, como siempre, su experiencia en esta ocasión, muchísimas gracias a su invitada especial, también nos aportó muchísimo a la plática. Y sí, qué bueno que se quedaron preguntas en el correo y están mandando otras por WhatsApp para podérselas hacer llegar por correo electrónico, doctora. Muchísimas gracias por su tiempo.
Soriana, they are saying thank you for
Thank you, Soriana.
valuable participation.
Welcome and thank you for inviting me.